volunteering for this seminar series and for everyone showing up. Thank you so much. This is very exciting. Over 80 people have come to see this talk, Khondoker. So Dr. Mottaleb is a global citizen, did his PhD in Japan, has worked in Bangladesh, now in Mexico. He's moving on to University of Arkansas, to our great sorrow. However, he has promised, and I know we all hold him to this, to keep working with us. And he's made huge contributions while his time at CIMMYT. He's moved up from being a postdoc at Erie to now a scientist in applied agricultural economics. His work is particularly focused on applied microeconomics, including human household behavior adoption. And I think it's most well known for his ex-ante impact assessment of promising agricultural technologies. In this case, he's going to talk about a quantitative exploration on the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine armed conflict, which is, of course, something that we're all thinking about. And we really look forward to this. Dr. Mottaleb, it's been a pleasure being your boss for a short time, too short, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. You're a rising star in applied microeconomics and ex-ante, and thank you so much for all that you do for the world. I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Sig. Thank you very much for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and warm welcome, everyone, to my presentation. I'm going to talk about potential impacts of Russia-Ukraine armed conflicts on global food security. Today, this is our topic. You know that ensuring food security is the basic objective of every nation in the world. However, very recently, the number of hungry people in the world has been increasing. In 2015, 654 million population were hungry, but in 2019, this number has increased to 864 million. This means additional 210 million people are hungry. And at least 47 countries in the world are off the track in achieving the United Nations the goal of zero hunger by 2030. Now the question is a very basic question: how to achieve food security and nutrition in the world? It's a very simple, very simple. We need to ensure available food at an affordable price for all time. That's the basic principle. Now, the food availability and food price are the major factors of ensuring food security in the world. The thing is, food price is not only a pillar of food security, but food price has been greatly discussed in political economy because of its importance in economic development. In Ricardo Schulz's food trap, the food price has been discussed as the food price determines the wage rate in developing countries. Now, if a country fails to maintain the food price, if food price goes up, then wage rate has to go up. And when wage rate goes up, then it reduces the profitability or profit of the entrepreneurs in the industrial sector, which discourages them for further investment, which hampers economic development. This critical case is widely known as the Ricardo Schulz food trap. And that's why they suggest to ensure food security or food self-sufficiency at the beginning stage of development for every development countries in the world. Now, the thing is, there are major factors that affect the food security and hunger, which can escalate hunger and food security in developing countries or all over the world. I have broadly categorized into 4 factors. One is climate shock. That is drought, flood, heat, and cold waves can reduce yield, reduce income, reduce production, and which can shift the supply curve upward, increase price, and then food insecurity it can trigger. Then outbreaks of crops and diseases and pests, like recently desert locust in horns of Africa, wheat blast in Latin America, Asia, and Africa, and maize lethal necrosis has created a lot of havoc in the world on food security. And also economic shock can trigger hunger and food security in the world. For example, recently COVID-19 in this lockdown and unprecedented economic downturn has actually brought back 34.3 million population extra into poverty trap. So economic shock can also trigger hunger and food insecurity. And fourth, and the most important, war and conflict. These factors can often generate supply shock, shrinking production, and disruption in international trade, which increase food price. I have explained here in a very simple graph. It's undergraduate type graph, where you can see the demand curve is DD, original, the original supply curve is SS, and the original equilibrium is E, where the price is P, and at price P, this nation consumes OQ amount of the quantity of any commodity, let's say Q. Now, because of supply shrink for any reason, let's say climatic condition, or let's say pest and diseases or war and conflict, the supply cost goes up. And with the initial demand, the new equilibrium is E prime, price goes up. And at this price, because price goes up, it forces consumer to consume less. So this is why the supply shrinking, the shrinking in supply or reduction in supply can trigger food insecurity, price hikes in the world. Now the thing is, among the all four factors, the major driver of food insecurity and hunger in the world is war and conflict. This is because war and conflict disrupts production and supply. It displaces labor, diverts resources from productive to unproductive and destructive purposes. War and conflict thus generate supply shock, what I showed in previous figure, that by supply shock means reduction in supply, and it creates food shortages problem and price hikes. In fact, in 2020, globally 155 million people were acutely food insecure, of which 99.1 million of those living in 23 countries where war and conflicts are going on. And you can see, when it is imperative to combat war and conflict, to minimize war and conflict in the world, to ensure food security, because COVID has brought a huge setback on human civilization. For example, 34.3 million extra population are fall into poverty because of COVID-19 lockdown and economic downturn. And human development has set back by 5 years on average, and some country it is 10 years. When it is necessary to combat war and conflict, to mitigate the problem or to minimize the war and conflict problem in the nations, a fresh armed conflict has started on 24th February between Russia and Ukraine. This issue is really important. Why? Because Russia and Ukraine are the major exporters of a number of important and crucial commodities. For example, Russia and Ukraine jointly supply 49% of sunflower oil in the world, 47% rye, 27% barley, 26% wheat, and 15% maize. And not only that, Russia solely exports 12% of entire chemical fertilizer in the world. And what happened? Because of armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, they couldn't export. And then what happened? Immediately, that supply shock, because many countries, they rely on Russian wheat or Russian commodities, supply has shrinked, price has gone up. And you can see, this is the graph. This graph covers August 1992 to July 2022, and you can see the increase in price in the recent months, only because this is triggered by the recent armed conflict. So based on this fact, we have in this study, of course, this all four commodities, they deserve individual study, country level case studies or global level case studies. But in this study, we particularly focus on wheat. That is the impact of ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine on wheat food security in the world. Why wheat? Wheat is the major crop since its adoption or domestication around 10,000 years before. So wheat is playing still today, wheat is playing a major role in food security. For example, in 2019, the wheat consumption per capita in the world average was 66 kilogram per capita, and daily calorie intake from wheat was 538 kilocalorie, which supplies 18%, which was the contribution was 18% to total calorie intake, and it supplies 16% of total protein intake daily by a person. And importantly, wheat is the most tradable crop in the world in terms of international trade. In 2020, wheat was cultivated in 104 countries on 219 million hectares of land, and total production was 701 million metric tons, out of which 28% was exported and imported by 179 countries. Now, I need your little attention here. You can see from here that 104 countries, they cultivate wheat, but imported by 179 countries. So it shows the importance of wheat trade or international wheat trade on food security in the world. Actually, many countries in the world, they completely rely on imported wheat for their demand. For example, a country like Djibouti, Oman. So here in the first panel, I have shown that total import of wheat from international market in 2020, divided in 2019, divided by total consumption as wheat as food. So you can see in some cases, some countries 200%. This is because many countries, they imported more wheat than they consumed. So what I showed from here in this graph, many countries, they rely completely on wheat import for meeting their demand. And many of those countries where food security is already precarious. So you can imagine from here that when when there's escalation of armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and what is the disruption of wheat trade, international trade, then what happened on these countries? In fact, the issue is important for another reason. Russia and Ukraine are the major exporters of wheat. In 2021, the total export of wheat in the world is nearly 200 million tons, of which Russia alone exported 33 million tons. And Ukraine was the number 5th that exported 19 million tons. In the lower panel, I have shown the countries that imported Ukraine or Ukraine and Russian wheat for their demand. You can see the blue color are the countries they solely imported from Russia, the wheat. Red color are the countries that solely imported wheat from Ukraine, and the greenish color are the countries they imported either from Russia or Ukraine. So you can see almost every country in the world, except a few exceptions like USA, Australia, or Brazil, Argentina, it's showing that almost all countries, they import Russian and Ukrainian wheat. Now, because of conflict, these two countries could not export their wheat in the world market. And how this impacted the global food security, that is our objective of this study. Now, the data, we have relied on the data from FAO-STAT, World Development Indicators and Global Hunger Index. We have mainly online data set. We tried to include almost all countries in the world except those few exporters, but we end up with 163 countries because many countries, some of the informations like wheat consumption or calorie intake information are not available. And we pulled data for 4 years, 2016 to 2019. There's a pooled, so it's a cross-section panel data. In my presentation, I have grouped countries based on their food security level provided by Global Hunger Index. So food security level are normal, moderate, and serious to alarming. And I grouped the serious, alarming, and extremely alarming countries into one group. And then I presented all the groups into these 3 groups. Now I will show you some of this data, but before that, let us talk about the modeling, the way, how we model this impact. So our major hypothesis here is that the producer price of wheat in the domestic country is a function of 3 major factors: international price, international trade, and domestic production. These are the 3 factors that affect producer price. And producer price is the major factor of affecting per capita consumption, calorie intake, and protein intake from wheat. In addition to producer price, we also assume that the urban population, GDP growth rate, and GDP per capita can also impact the per capita wheat consumption. Actually, we reviewed some literature and we found that these are the factors. Those are the drivers of changing food consumption pattern in developing countries. So that's why we included. In the next slide, I will show how we translated this model into econometric equation. So in the first equation, we have estimated the inverse demand function, in which the dependent variable is the producer price of wheat in the domestic country. And the independent variables are 3, that's what I showed here, that international price of wheat, domestic production, and at the same time, international trade. So we put this as these 3 factors are explaining this domestic product price of wheat. So there's a dependent variable. We have taken the natural log of production, this domestic producer of wheat, this natural log. We have taken all the variables into natural log form except trade. Why we did not take trade? Because there are some countries, there is no trade at all. So if we take natural log, it will be 0. So we have to drop those things. To avoid this, we just take as a level form the trade variable. This is the first equation. Remember that our objective is to see the impact of this trade restriction, of wheat trade restriction from Russia and Ukraine on the global food security, wheat food security. So second equation, it includes the wheat food consumption. So the dependent variable YCK, that is a vector of dependent variables that include natural log of yearly wheat consumption per capita in kilogram, daily per capita calorie intake from wheat, and protein intake from wheat, daily per capita. This is our dependent variable. Independent variable, of course, we have included this producer price, what we estimated in the previous equation. In addition to that, we have also included the country food security status, like severe to alarming food security status, yes or no is 1. And then medium food security level is yes, is 1, 0 otherwise. And then we keep normal food security situation as the base. So this is our second equation. And before jumping into showing the regression result, I'd like to show the wheat economy in these sample countries. And then we applied the conditional mixed process estimator with multi-level random effect model in estimating the model. This is, I said again, there's a cross-section panel data for 4 years. And then this is recursive modeling, not 2-stage. So recursive modeling, if you are interested, I can share you the strata code or everything, whatever you want. But the thing is, it's very simple. It estimates the first equation, that is producer price first, and then it fits automatically second equation to explain the consumption of wheat. So that is the process of estimation. I will show some of the wheat economy thing in this next few slides. So we have 163 sample countries, of which we have divided into 3 categories or 3 groups. One category of countries where the food security level is severe to extremely alarming. This is group 1. It belongs to 40 countries. It belongs in this group. The second group, food security level, is moderate. Actually, this extremely or extreme to moderate and normal food security situation in developing countries is given by the Global Hunger Index. There are some index they have seen, like 20 to 35 is severely alarming, then 15 to 25 or 10 to 25, 20 like this moderate, and then below like 10 is normal food security situation. So you can see from in this slide that 40 countries belongs to extremely severe to extremely food security situation group, 30 countries into moderate group, and 90 countries into normal food security group. So here I have presented this domestic wheat production, domestic wheat supply. So wheat supply and production, there's a difference because wheat supply is domestic wheat production plus minus export import. So this is the domestic supply. Imported wheat in terms of 1,000 tons, value of imported wheat, that is in million US dollar, and exported wheat exported. So you see, on average, the countries belongs to severe to extremely alarming food security situation. They produce like 3.5 million tons of wheat on average yearly, but their domestic supply is 4.4 million ton, and they import like 832,000 tons of wheat yearly on average per country. However, the country with moderate to normal food security situation, they import more than 1 million ton of wheat. And value of imported wheat for the countries where food security situation is moderate to extremely alarming, severe to extremely alarming, 221 million US dollar, which is 333 million US dollar for the moderate food security group. And wheat, these countries also export wheat. And for example, severe to extremely alarming food security situation group, they export wheat like 13,000 tons of wheat they export. In the next slide, I'm going to show some interesting fact. You see this one, the value of export wheat, everything else, but see the share of imported wheat from Russia and Ukraine. So the countries where food security situation is extremely alarming, they rely 33% of their wheat import from Russia and Ukraine. And the countries where food security situation is moderate, they import 36% of their import from the source wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Now you can see the importance for those countries where food security situation is already precarious. So this means this embargo on export of wheat from Russia and Ukraine actually hurt more to the countries where food security situation is already precarious, not to the countries where normal. You can see from here. And value, I also presented here the value of imported wheat from Russia and Ukraine, the share of cost of wheat from imports from Russia and Ukraine in the international price. So you remember last 2 rows, in this table, you can see this international price of wheat. This is a independent variable in explaining the producer price of wheat. In our first equation, if you remember, I will show it again in a later. In this slide, I have shown that the food consumption pattern, the wheat consumption pattern. Remember that our objective is to see the impact, the potential impact on wheat food consumption due to embargo or due to a restricted wheat export from Russia and Ukraine because of war and conflict, because of armed conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So you can see from here, the countries where food security situation is extremely alarming, the yearly per capita wheat consumption is 42 kilogram per capita. The moderate, 45, and in the normal, this is more than 90 kilogram per capita. But if you see this protein intake share or calorie intake share from wheat is really high in developing countries, particularly in countries where food security situation is extremely alarming or moderate. For example, countries where food security situation, or the first group of countries, is extremely alarming, the calorie intake from wheat is 14% per capita per day. Protein intake from wheat is 16% per capita per day, which is 14% per capita per day for country where food security situation is moderate, and more than 13% calorie intake per capita per day from wheat, where the food security situation is moderate. So again, it shows that the importance of wheat in the countries where food security situation is really precarious or extremely alarming. In the next slide, I'll showing three of the major macroeconomic variables what we included in our study. That is per capita income, yearly per capita income, GDP growth rate, and share of urban population. Remember, if you remember our model, that we show that okay, these are the factors that is explaining the per capita consumption of wheat, the daily per capita intake of calorie from wheat, and daily per capita intake of protein from wheat. These are the factors. And in addition to producer price of wheat, these are the three factors that's explaining. These are the literature say that these are the factors. Every country, if there is a food consumption pattern is changing, particularly in developing countries, these are the major factors behind those changing food consumption pattern. So you see from here, the interesting fact, of course, it's very obvious. The countries where food security situation is extremely alarming, their per capita GDP per capita per year was $1,600. It is simply 3 times higher for the country where the food security is moderate level, and it is 15% higher for the countries where food security situation is normal. So you can see it's a very typical character of developing country, why the food security situation is not really good. It's extremely alarming because their per capita income is low, so their purchasing power is low. So any increasing price or price hike can hurt those countries more than other countries. You can see the GDP growth rate. Of course, I like to tell here that this is triennium average. Whatever I have shown in this table, I have shown the 3-year average, 17, 18, and 19, 2019, this average of this one. And obviously you can see the country where food security situation is extremely alarming, the share of urban population is low compared to the countries with moderate food security level or normal food security level. Now, keeping this background, I'm going to show you a simple 2x2 correlation matrix here. It is not regression, simple correlation, just to show how the producer price, international wheat price, and consumption of wheat are interrelated and how they impact each other. The first column, it shows the relationship between consumption of per capita wheat yearly and the relationship, the correlation with other variables. For example, the last row number 5, you can see that minus 0.27 means international wheat price negatively affect the consumption of wheat. What does it mean? If the international wheat price goes up, in a domestic country, wheat consumption goes up per capita, goes down per capita because the relationship is negative. Similarly, the producer price also impact consumption of wheat negatively. If price goes up, consumption goes down. Here, I'd like to request you to see this last cell, cell number 4 in the row number 5. You see that there's a positive assertion between international price and domestic price or producer price. This means if international price goes up, obviously it will impact the domestic price of wheat to goes up. So this is the relationship. Now I'm going to show you this, our interesting regression result. So the first result we're going to show about the producer price is dependent variable. And we have 3 major variables I have shown here. I have not included all the regressors here, like country damage and year damage here, only 3. So domestic production is a determinant here. Export and import, that's trade is determinants, and international price of wheat is determinants. It shows the producer price of wheat is negatively affected by domestic production. What does it mean? It means if domestic production of wheat goes up, price has to go down. And it goes down by 0.02%. It means a 1% increase in domestic producer of wheat, it decrease producer price by 0.02%. then there is a negative assertion or negative relationship between international trade and producer price also. So here you see that the variable is in level form, so we have to multiply by 100 in case. So it shows that a 1% increase in international trade can decrease domestic price by 1.1%. This is interesting. This means if more trade, less price, so more consumption. Similarly, if there is a more price in international market, the domestic price will go up. For example, here from our regression result, it shows that a 1% increase in international price, the producer price of wheat goes by 0.89%. This is in percentage form because both are in log form. This is the first stage equation. The second stage equation I'm going to show here is that the relationship between wheat consumption per capita, calorie intake from wheat, and protein intake from wheat, and producer price. You can see producer price and the consumption of wheat, the calorie intake from wheat and protein from wheat are negatively related. It means from our regression result, a 1% increase in producer price can decrease wheat consumption by 0.59%, calorie intake by 0.54%. So this is the result. In vice versa, a 1% decrease in wheat producer price can increase consumption by 0.59%, can increase calorie intake by 0.54%. Now, we extrapolate the result to see the impact, the potential impact of embargo of export of wheat from Russia and Ukraine. In the next slide, I'm going to explain. Remember our model that a 1% increase in international trade can reduce producer price by 1.1%. So keeping this in mind, let us assume a 50% reduction of Ukrainian and Russian wheat export in the world, which is exactly 14.4% of total wheat export in the world. If a reduction, a 50% of Russian Ukrainian wheat, which is equal to 14.4% reduction of international wheat trade in the global market, it will increase domestic price in a sample country by 15%. Simply you multiply by this coefficient and you can get this one. And so what it shows that because of restriction of wheat export on Russia and Ukraine, the world wheat price has already gone up. I have shown in the figure, I will show it again. Now how it translates into consumption, remember that our consumption, if you remember this slide, that a 1% increase in producer price, or in contrast, or in vice versa, a 1% decrease in producer price can increase consumption by 0.59%. And in other way, a 1% increase in producer price can decrease consumption by 0.59%. Here, this is the coefficient. So now we have shown that a 50% reduction of wheat export from Russia and Ukraine can increase domestic price by 15%. Now, because of increase of 15% price, wheat consumption per capita will be reduced by 8.9%. Calorie intake from wheat per capita daily will be reduced by 8.1%. And protein intake from wheat will reduce by 9.6% in the sample countries. Now, you see, this is the graph I showed you, that these are the 4 graphs. Already I showed you how the price has increased. Now, you see, now you can imagine what has happened already in the developing countries, those who rely heavily on import of wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Now, we have some simple policy implication, conclusion policy implication. First of all, of course, we have to minimize the armed conflict in the global, because this is the major cause of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity and food price hike in globally. And as our results, I showed you that 155 million people currently are living in the world under acute food insecurity, of which 99 million people are living in 23 countries where conflict is going on. So we need to minimize anyhow. And now wheat export restriction from Russia and Ukraine can significantly impact the global food security, what we showed. This is particularly severe for the food vulnerable countries. remember that we have divided our countries into 3 groups: severely food insecure, moderately food insecure, and normal food security situation. We have shown that 33% of the import of wheat comes from Russia and Ukraine. So they're the most vulnerable, that already impacted. So we suggest from our study that United Nations and other international organizations should work to establish a humanitarian corridor for safe shipment of commodities through the Black Sea port. However, these are the very inductive. Now, based on our result, we have some policy implications. We have produced some policy implications. For example, by 2050, the total population in the world will be 9.7 billion. And wheat will be continued as a central crop or major crop to ensure food security in the globe, even by 2050. So we must ensure steady supply of wheat to ensure food security when the population will be 9.7 billion in the world. How to do that? We have to ensure steady public funding to ensure adaptive and basic research to improve agronomic management and to achieve genetic gains of wheat production. This means we need to do research on yield enhancement. That's a very nice and very prime objective should be. And remember Ricardo Schulz's food trap. If many countries in the world, particularly developing countries, fail to meet their food production, and if price goes up, this will ultimately hamper their economic development by creating Ricardo Schulz's food trap. So basic research on wheat and genetic yield gain can really help those countries to avoid this Ricardo Schulz's food trap. Also, our result shows that domestic production can reduce producer price. And a reduction of producer price means food security, improvement in food security, because the consumer can consume more with the reduction in price. So domestic production should be enhanced. How? Again, through the basic and adaptive research, improve agronomic management and genetic gains, harnessing genetic gains of wheat through basic and adaptive research. Also, there is a possibility of exploring the potentiality of expanding wheat areas in Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, and Brazil and Argentina. Yesterday, I just saw one paper I shared with one of our colleagues today, that there is a big potentiality of expanding wheat area in Brazil and Argentina. Of course, we need to take care into mind environmental impact, negative environmental impact of expansion of areas, but still there's a possibility. So we need to harness the potentiality of expansion of wheat areas in the countries. Also, reducing yield gap in Africa can be really helpful in achieving wheat food security in the world. Still today, the average yield in Africa is really lower than global average, even the average yield of Asia. So there's a potentiality of reducing yield gap, ensuring food security, and avoiding food trap in developing countries, particularly in Africa. One more thing, we have seen that when there's a COVID started, and when there was a war, there is a armed conflict escalated between Russia and Ukraine, many countries voluntarily, they imposed ban on their exports. For example, Malaysia, suddenly they stopped exporting chicken. Singapore, Indonesia, they banned exporting palm oil, and India voluntarily, they banned exporting wheat. So many countries, they started banning exporting of their product. So there should be, this is really creates more havoc on the countries where food security is really precarious. So probably international communities and World Trade Organization should have some policy to prohibit this kind of behavior unless and until it is absolutely necessary. So these are the few of the policy implications from our study. And thank you very much for giving me a patient hearing. At this stage, I'll be very happy to entertain a few of your questions. Thank you very much.
I think we can all give him a big clap. All right, that was sobering, but very important. Why don't you go ahead and moderate your own questions? Do you see the question in the chat? It's a very in-depth one from Zachary Katanga. Khondoker, can you see that?
Yeah, I can open that. Yes, Jeffrey, as a very nice question. Honestly, Jeffrey, this is the this is a very pure impact study. If we have the data, look, honestly speaking, in the globally, you cannot see very real pure panel data to conduct impact studies. So that's why most of the impact studies are based on either crop modeling or expert solicitation, or like me, cross-section panel data. So to get before and after or to counterfactual, we need those data. Unfortunately, there is no such data. And also, I should explain some of the limitations of our study, that this is cross-section panel data. Many countries, they deserve country-level in-depth studies, not global studies. For example, we have shown that globally the price of wheat will increase by 15% because of reduction of 50% reduction of wheat export by Russia and Ukraine. Honestly, this can be very big for many countries. For example, a country like Djibouti, 100% import from Russia and Ukraine. So there might be 100% increase, not 15%. So this is a very good question, but unfortunately, we cannot do that using this data set. Absolutely. Honestly speaking, Victor, that's what we, in our paper, we wrote, and we got criticized that we said, look, we are only depending on wheat for this food security, but we should diversify our food consumption for the time being. And I gave an example, like, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1990, where there is a war, they were not maize-eating country, but they consumed a lot of maize that time, because you have to find some alternative. Of course, there's a very good suggestion that multi-cropping system, like wheat rotation, replacement with some other cereals. Yes, that can be, policy. We put that in our paper, by the way, Victor. Thank you very much for this question.
Can I just barge in for two more?
Yes, please.
See? Yeah. Mottaleb? Okay. Yes. So anyway, lovely to see you. I was just typing, but I get tired of all this typing. I type all my life. At some point, it's just. So anyway, the reason also with your conclusions is they're very wheat focused naturally because you're focusing on wheat. But I always find it slightly spurious. It's slightly self-serving. That's the thing I'm also worried about. Okay. Nonetheless, at least one more point. What about delinking producers' price from reductions in wheat available for trade? I mean, that's ultimately about regulation. And nobody's really talking about regulation. When a market goes haywire, namely, suddenly a huge chunk is no longer, I mean, that's amazing, 15% being pulled out of the market. It's, in like a month or something. So I think isn't there a recommendation avenue there? Thanks. Anyway, lovely to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Honestly, I mean, this 15%, if you see our regression result, this is based on it. But as I said, because we modeled in such a way that the domestic price is a function of international price, is a function of international trade, and that's why. But honestly speaking, in many countries, this number should go far more up. For the countries like those who 100% rely on Indonesia, the 100% import from Russia and Ukraine, like Djibouti, the 100%, Eritrea, the 100%. So those are the countries, the price might go more up than 15%. 15% is the global average. 162 countries, on average, every country, a 50% reduction in wheat export by Russia and Ukraine can increase their domestic price by 15%. That's the result. Yeah, but honestly, this also shows the linkage, the globalization of the countries with each other. That if there is any web started in any country, it also affects other countries. So this is the. Yeah, thank you, Victor. Tech was asking Dr. Tepsapkota how much yield. Honestly, that should be the question that crop modeler or a breeder should ask. But in our study we have shown that there is a huge gap between the yield in Africa and yield in Asia, particular, or global average yield. So that's why we said that probably there is a scope for reducing yield gap in Africa, wheat yield gap, which can be enormously beneficial for those countries to avoid the food trap. I explained the Ricardo Schulz food trap, how it can hamper the economic progress of the country if we fail to maintain food at affordable price in developing countries. So that's the thing. And of course, I mean, it deserves another study. Honestly speaking, I mean, this is beyond our scope in our study. So where he has a question that I'm reading the SIG from the chat box.
Perfect. Yes, I'm very interested in that substitution question. Do we have data on that? Can we possibly look at that, or scenarios or something?
Honestly,
A very good question, Ray. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really nice. I mean, many countries, let's say, if we replace wheat by the, honestly speaking, SIG, one of the important thing with food, you cannot replace 100%. You cannot go Bangladesh and 100% people say that stop eating rice. Is a major rice eating country in the world, rice consuming country. To some extent, it is possible. For example, I gave an example like Bosnia and Herzegovina during the 1990s war. They consume a lot of maize. But again, if you see now, they have switched to wheat now, no more maize. So probably as a, like for the time being, during the crisis period, you can ask people to switch to consume other crop, but in the ultimately you cannot do that because food consumption is very, very country and geography specific and nation specific. Nonetheless, there are some scope, of course, food diversification. Yeah, this is also good for nutrition. But unfortunately, our study, we did not consider this thing in a study. Yeah, Abdul Mottaleb. Yeah, thank you very much, Abdul Mottaleb. So yeah, if you have any more questions, I'll be very happy to entertain at this stage.
Okay, and Gideon has his hand up. Why don't you come in, Gideon?
Yeah, sure. Nice presentation, Khondoker. Thank you very much. I'd like to really, the point you just made, the substitution between crops, that it's limited. That's a really valid point, and this is something that kind of tends to be overlooked in a lot of these discussions. So it really is important, but there is also another aspect there where you look at the wheat importing countries. You have countries where wheat is an important food crop, and there's countries where wheat is not because of the sheer size of the country, they import a lot of wheat, like Indonesia. But wheat in Indonesia is a luxury good. So actually, the elasticity of demand for wheat is much higher than in a country like Djibouti, where wheat is actually a staple food, or in Sudan, where it's a staple food. So this is where we really need to unpack those kind of things. Now, one of the policy conclusions is, look at how can we increase production and productivity in other areas so that that countries are less dependent on imports. A lot of countries, it makes sense to concentrate on other crops than wheat, or for maize or whatever other crops, and import those. And then the question arises: well, can you address that vulnerability to external shocks, whether it is extreme weather, conflict, a COVID pandemic that disrupts trade flows, you name it. There's a whole range of these kind of shocks that can occur. Now, if you look at the global stocks of major commodities in the world, at the statistics on that, you see this after the last major food crisis in the early 2000s, that China started stockpiling. They currently have a year's stock of their major commodities. They have it in stock. So they're basically, they've insulated themselves from these kind of shocks. I mean, if there is this major disruption in trade flows or in production, then they don't have to worry. They're not completely running into, okay, now it's going to hit our food security. So this is an alternative narrative that you can put forward, where you say, in the good years, we need to be producing more than when we can consume, and countries need to start building up a certain strategic reserves to be resilient under these kind of shocks. And with climate change, these kind of shocks are likely to become more frequent because of adverse weather events that directly affect crop production, or because of the changing climates, the emergence of new pests and diseases, which will adversely affect production. So it's likely that these kind of shocks are going to become more frequent. So it makes a lot of sense to start building up those kind of stocks. I'll leave it for
Absolutely
for this right now.
No, honestly speaking, I mean, almost every country has some strategic stock already. But for the poor countries, they mostly rely on this international market. That's why they're more vulnerable. So yeah, that can be a policy implication for those countries, but I don't know how to implement. Yeah. Sig, I got another question from our amigo Kindi from Ethiopia. He said that, honestly speaking, Kindi, look, if you see our model is a very simplistic model, we just model the way producer price is a function of international price. But if you see, actually international price is a function of international trade. So we should be a 3-stage. But because of the paucity of data, because of complexity, we just come up with only 2-stage. But that can be a very good question, that how this international fertilizer price, it affects domestic wheat production, the domestic wheat production, how it affects producer price, and how producer price, it affects the wheat consumption. That should be the modeling way. Unfortunately, for the paucity of data, for the sake of complexity, we just come up with 2 stages of modeling. But I'm sure that under SIG's leadership, we are working on the fertilizer price, and then one paper we're working. But in our model, we have not included this one, the fertilizer price. Thank you, Kindi.
So, Khondoker, you've again raised so many good questions that we're getting everything from Victor pointing out about cropping systems to Kindi about fertilizer interactions. I think you've just set the stage for many more questions which the world has to start to engage with, and we can really support the substitution, how much scenarios, so much to do in this area, and you've really set the stage. Thanks again, Khondoker. We're really looking forward to working with you in your new job at University of Arkansas. So thanks again for all you've done, and everyone for your interactions. This very important topic. Take care all, and we'll see you down the road.
Thank you everyone.
Isabel, you have our next presentation. Do we have another? Who's next lined up, please?
Next week, we are going to have another invitee, Dr. Wessler, and then we will be announcing another SAS seminar very soon. Thank you.